Welcome to On the Middle East. My name is Amran Zaman, and today I'll be discussing allegations that Saudi Arabia is responsible for the mass killings of Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers on the kingdom's borders with Yemen. The revelations were brought to the fore in a chilling new report by Human Rights Watch, which details the carnage. Saudi border guards are said to have used explosive weapons and shot people at close range. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people are believed to have died, including women and children. Saudi Arabia denies the charges, which were amply documented with victims' testimonies and satellite imagery. Anti-migrant feelings are on the rise across the world, with little sympathy felt for the countless people who perish daily as they seek safety and a better life for their loved ones. With us here to discuss the report is Nadia Hardman of the Refugee and Migrants' Rights Division of Human Rights Watch. So welcome to our program, Nadia.
Thank you so much for having me.
A really chilling report. You've got a lot of attention with it. Can you just summarize for our audience what exactly has been going on this border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to put it into a bit of context, this report really is about mass killings on the Saudi-Yemen border of Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers. But these are people that are attempting a journey from the Horn of Africa. Predominantly from Ethiopia. It's estimated that over 90% who go on this migration route are Ethiopian, and a lot of them are women and kids, traveling through Yemen, getting to Saudi Arabia, facilitated by a network of smugglers and traffickers, and then facilitated by the Houthi forces that control the north of Yemen. And then they try and cross. And basically what we found is a widespread and systematic pattern of attacks. Saudi border guards are firing explosive weapons and shooting migrants and asylum seekers at close range at this border. We've documented many, at least hundreds, possibly thousands of killings. And this is why we're saying that it may amount to a crime against humanity.
And this has been going on for at least a year, right?
At least, Yemen. Look, my research covers a period of March 2022 and June 2023. I mean, what that means is that I started investigating, what was happening because I started receiving reports at the end of last year. And I spoke to 42 Ethiopians who had attempted this journey, or the friends and relatives of people that had died. And basically, the time period covers crossings from March to June 2023. But we know that people have been killed in this widespread and systematic manner before March 2022, because the UN, in the form of its independent rapporteurs, actually wrote to the Saudis last year. And that letter was made public in October of 2022, alleging similar violations to ours. And they documented over 400 killings between January and April 2022. So all of that to say that, it's more than a year. It's probably likely the last 2 years. It's an estimate. We can't verify exactly when this started happening. But we know that it is a dramatic escalation, because previously we would document occasional and infrequent killings at the border, nothing of this scale.
So, I mean, what can you do about it, given that the Saudi Arabians are denying that this is even happening? What kind of measures can be taken? What kind of pressure can be brought to bear on Saudi Arabia to stop killing these people?
I mean, the short answer is I don't know what exactly we need to do to really get the world's attention. I mean, I feel like we do have the world's attention with this report, but to actually, follow through with accountability and ensure that there is no impunity for these kind of horrendous crimes is, that's, we'll have to see what plays out in the next, weeks and months. But Saudi Arabia spends billions, really so much of its resources go into deflecting attention away from its, egregious human rights record. We know that it still kills its own citizens. It has the death penalty, and these killings, the death penalty executions have increased recently under MBS. There's torture in Saudi Arabian prisons, and we've already documented a host of violations of migrants in detention in Saudi Arabia. Again, horrifying conditions, unlawful killings, torture, awful stories. So, I obviously want to speak with hope and say that, in this instance, there will be a difference. But we've given, a menu of recommendations that governments can draw upon. Targeted sanctions for officials that are credibly implicated in the killings, decisions not to participate in sporting events that are designed to, sports wash or whitewash Saudi Arabia's image, the cessation of transfers of arms and weapons to Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's so much, really. Most importantly, we're calling on the UN to establish a mechanism to assess whether these killings amount to a crime against humanity. So really an independent investigation. But, we've just heard that Saudi Arabia has been admitted to BRICS. There's in the same week that we document these atrocity crimes, you still have Saudi Arabia playing a more involved role on the global scale. So I don't know. I want to be hopeful, but it does seem difficult.
Well, do you have, I mean, I'm guessing you have private conversations with State Department officials, with EU officials. What do they tell you?
We've done briefings. I mean, obviously, we continuously brief governments and states as we do our documentation. It's important for us to do that, not just to focus on when we publicize the report. Of course, I can't sort of disclose the private interactions, but, we understand that governments are concerned, that's clear. We've seen various public statements to that effect, but it's going to be, that's fine. We need to see if they'll follow through and demand something far more concrete in the form of an independent investigation. So, yeah, I really don't know what more is needed. As I said, Saudi Arabia has been invited to join BRICS just, I think, a few hours ago. It's like more and more it seems that its efforts to deflect attention are bearing a result. And, obviously it's a difficult landscape when people talk about migration routes, but really these are mass killings of women and kids at a border which is remote, inaccessible, and in a country where there's already a humanitarian crisis. People have lost one or more of their limbs. They are traumatized. And really, this is on the world's conscious in terms of what happens next.
Well, it didn't help, certainly, that President Biden initially said that Saudi Arabia was a pariah, and this was very much connected to the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, only to go and visit the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the King of Saudi Arabia, and try and sort of fix the relationship. It's almost as if this kind of rewards impunity. At the same time, we know that the US is very keen to see Saudi Arabia join the other Gulf states in establishing relations with Israel. And so that seems to all take precedence over any other concerns. So, I guess one thing that you probably must be focusing on is what to do about these smuggling networks, right? Because they are big enablers. Is there more that can be done there, perhaps, with the UN and others?
Yes, you're right. The smuggling networks, these trafficking networks that exploit migrants and asylum seekers from Ethiopia are extremely culpable. It's an abusive network that really also is a huge part of the problem on this route. They beat migrants, they extort payments. I've seen videos of people being tortured, and these videos are then sent to families to send more money to traffickers and smugglers as they take people along the route. It's just horrifying stuff. I've spoken to women and girls that were raped by their smugglers, and now they're pregnant. It's important to focus on how we can bring justice for victims in the face of smugglers and traffickers, and break up those networks. But I would also say it's important not to make that the main focus. We have authorities like the Houthi forces that control the north of Yemen, that are responsible for that area and are part of the facilitation of migrants and asylum seekers getting to the border. They also abuse migrants. They extort payments. They beat them. I've spoken to migrants and asylum seekers who were recovering in hospitals after an explosive weapon attack, and they were collected from the hospital by the Houthi forces and taken back to a smuggler so that they could attempt another crossing again. So really, horrible stuff. They run abusive detention centers for migrants in the north. So we wrote to the Houthi forces, who did reply at the weekend. As for the Saudi authorities, I mean, yes, again, you have state officials directly firing explosive weapons against civilians. I mean, it's just, shocking to really even imagine. And I think for the purposes of this report, that's the main focus we want the world to have on right now.
I mean, given the horrors these people face, I mean, isn't it astonishing that they still continue to try to make this journey?
Absolutely. I mean, look, yes, I think one of the things that I found quite shocking, again, in the context of this report, is how many people told me that, after surviving an explosive weapon attack, after being injured, shot at, traumatized, they were thinking of trying to cross again. And that's because they find themselves in, just a situation where they really have limited choices, or none whatsoever. People can't get back to Ethiopia. It's really difficult to get back to Ethiopia from Yemen. And those that are in Ethiopia are generally fleeing the conflict in the north, or they're in extreme poverty, or, for example, they've experienced, continuous drought and can't make a living on their farmland. And these reasons have been consistent over the years for why people are leaving and trying to access Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, just like many other countries in the world, there are no legal and safe passages, legal and safe routes for people to try to leave and access a better life. So they feel that they have no other choice but to go on these routes. And, the smuggling gangs are really good at exploiting people. They're really good at luring people. And, 750,000 Ethiopians live and work in Saudi Arabia. There are job opportunities there. And we know that Saudi Arabia relies, on the bedrock that is migrant labor in the country.
Well, I mean, conflict, obviously, economic opportunity, these have been the main drivers of this kind of illegal migration. But I guess climate change is now emerging as a really big reason that people are moving. And going forward, I imagine, we're going to see mass movements of people. And at the same time, we also see just a growing resentment towards migrants across the world, and politicians building on that resentment to elevate themselves. I mean, as a journalist, I find it increasingly difficult to write about these stories because, they don't get as much attention anymore. There seems to be a sort of indifference. And you, as a human rights worker, how do you feel when you're doing this work? And, do you feel frustrated and like that sometimes it's kind of hopeless?
Yes, basically, yes. I mean, look, I'm a refugee and migrant rights researcher. It's the bread and butter of what I do. And, trying to understand what we can do to change, one, the narrative, but also just, press on governments and states. They have international obligations to, let people seek asylum any way they can, is just like really hard right now. We lost the narrative battle, I think, a long time ago. That it almost feels like a dirty word to talk about refugees and migrants and asylum seekers. I mean, they're just people, people who need to reach safety in many cases, and it is tough. It's really tough, and we don't just want to focus on the horrendous abuses. I mean, that's obviously part of it, but it's also just about letting people access safety, asylum, principles that we thought were already enshrined in international law and that many countries had, like wanted to comply with. Instead, what we just see are blocks, constant blocks along the way, and an increasing desire to focus on the smugglers is the problem. It's not just. I mean, that's definitely part of the problem. States just don't want to deal with people on the move, and there are certain states, particularly in Europe and elsewhere, that can safely welcome migrants and asylum seekers into their countries. They do have the resources, and we've shown that with Ukraine. Like, we had a really good example of international solidarity and welcoming people into Europe. So there is a precedent, but it's not popular. It's become a really unpopular issue. So yeah, I struggle with advocacy. I mean, especially when it comes to, I've documented these horrifying abuses at the Yemen-Saudi border, but it's not like, the EU and its member states, or the US for that matter, are any particular, or any particular high ground on these issues either. At home we are, I mean, at home I'm British, we have effectively an asylum ban in place. So it is tough. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, which is exactly what I will continue to try and do. But right now, the most urgent call for the work I'm doing on the Yemen-Saudi border is to call for the immediate cessation of targeting migrants and asylum seekers from Ethiopia with explosive weapons and shooting people. That just needs to stop immediately.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nadia. Thank you so much for this very important work that you've done. And thank you for coming on our program. I know you're in high demand at the moment, and hopefully things will improve at some point.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, really. Thank you very much.
And this brings us to the end of another episode of On the Middle East. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Nadia. It was pretty tough, and I do hope you read that report. Thank you and goodbye.